Now I know what you're thinking. Am I about to watch a talking bird talk about a movie about talking birds? If you can handle it, then yes. If not, then that's okay too. If you somehow didn't pick up on this entire thing going on right here, I love birds! I love to do bird watching as a hobby. I'm a biology major. I've taken classes in ornithology. So I'm really hoping for it to become part of my career. And I'm also hoping my future employers don't see this. Anyways, you can most certainly count on my qualifications to overanalyze this piece of media intended for children, because it was made by adults, and adults make decisions. Rio was released by Blue Sky Studios in the spring of 2011 and met with generally positive reviews. I don't think people liked it as much as Ice Age for sure, but for many, it was still a beloved staple of the early 2010s, like getting your nipples pierced at Claire's. Shoutouts to Angry Birds Rio, which I could have sworn was lost media until I just looked it up and found a version I could play in my browser. So it was me. I'm the one who found it. So did I hyperfixate on this movie as a child? No. I was 7 years old and still having my dinosaur phase, and I saw it once in theaters and never saw it again. My household was not a Rio household. It was an Ice Age household. I don't know why it couldn't have been both, but that's just how things played out. Life when you're a kid is so weird, and I feel like there's a lot of things that if I had the chance to watch again or get on DVD, I would have absolutely adored. So I guess this video is another attempt at reconciling something from my past, but I'll try to keep it short this time. The movie follows an orphan Spix's macaw who tumbles out of a pet smuggling truck in Minnesota and is taken in by a little girl named Linda. She then names this pitiful creature Tyler Blue Gunderson, which is definitely a name. Anyways, fast forward 15 years, they grow up together and become best buddies. All is well in their peaceful lives until a kooky scientist named Tulio tells Linda that her macaw is actually the last male of his kind and needs to be captive bred in Rio with the only remaining female to save their entire species. I don't think he's a very good scientist, but we'll get to that later. They fly down to Brazil and soon arrive at the care facility. Blue meets Jewel in her enclosure, and they don't particularly get along. Since she's a feral parrot and he's domestic, she pretty much calls him a kitty pet and tells him to fuck off. But later that night, wildlife smugglers suddenly infiltrate the facility and capture both of them, chaining them together. They end up escaping and for the rest of the movie have to navigate the jungle and the city handcuffed. Or foot cuffed, I guess. Also worth noting, Blue can't fly because he fell out of his nest due to, guess what? It's smuggling. The smuggling made him fall out of his nest. I'll give this movie credit. It has chosen a single environmental issue and it is sticking with it. So when does this movie actually start to fall apart? Every step of the way! Now don't get me wrong, Rio gets a lot right about birds, and a good chunk of its inaccuracies can be pinned down to functioning off cartoon logic. But since all the main characters are based off real bird species, I say it's time for a little deep dive. So 66 million years ago, there were these things called theropods that would essentially— wait. Hold on, sorry. That might be kind of long. Oh, okay, here we go. As you may or may not know, the plot of Rio is based off the real-life conservation story of the critically endangered Spix's macaw. These birds actually don't live in the Amazon. Instead, they used to live in a biome of dry Brazilian forest. But wouldn't you know, everything gets ruined after colonization. Habitat loss from logging and agriculture completely devastated their numbers. So not only were their trees gone, but their eggs would be eaten by all sorts of invasive mammals, one of which are actually marmoset monkeys, who might look a little bit familiar. At first I was kind of confused why the birds and the monkeys hated each other so much, but it was generational trauma the whole time. Spixes were also unfortunately in high demand for illegal trade throughout the centuries, so there's another thing the movie got right. Also, I'm sure you noticed I said used to live. Yeah. In 2019, there was a sudden influx of articles along the lines of, the birds from Rio are extinct now. And before you freak out, they're not actually extinct. They're extinct in the wild. There is still a captive population. They're fine. Sort of. Because the initial breeding population of these birds was so small and also consisted of related individuals, their genetic diversity isn't doing too great. This makes them susceptible to a lot of harmful traits that impacts their likelihood of survival. For example, laying eggs that only hatch 10% of the time. Those statistics aren't the best. But what does this mean for Blue and Jewel, my gleeby-deeby comfort characters? It means if they're truly the last mating pair of their species, inbreeding is inevitable and their family is doomed to suffer the consequences. Did you ever consider that? Like, what happens next? No! Because before their kids asked about the birds and the bees and they all simultaneously realized their unspeakable fates, they conveniently discover a thriving new population of macaws in the sequel. It's almost as if they knew this was an uncomfortable implication that needed to be resolved as soon as possible. Congratulations, Blue Sky, you avoided inbreeding for the second time. Yeah. This isn't the first time they've done this.
Do you realize that now we have a chance to save our species?
Okay, then what? Then what, Manny? But of course he finds another herd of mammoths at the end of the movie because these problems just solve themselves. Anyways, despite an ocean of continuous complications, the real-life Spix's macaws are making pretty solid progress towards recovery. So hey, not all hope is lost. In fact, the macaws simply being associated with Rio brought a lot of new public interest to their conservation. And that's also how you're learning about it right now. But hearing about all this professionalism is really making me wonder, how well does Dr. Tulio, with his PhD in ornithology, go about his own conservation projects? Well, by being an absolute disgrace to the scientific method itself. It goes without saying that this man is a walking health code violation. He puts wild bird feathers in his mouth, he lets birds eat out of his mouth, and the latter can actually spread human bacteria to these birds and kill them. Not to mention, there's actually an extremely toxic bird species called the hooded pitahui, and if Tulio found one of these things, he would just shove it in his mouth anyways. Also, once Jewel and Blue are in the wild, he doesn't even ban them or put a tracking device on them. Those are the last two of the species, and you're not gonna keep track of them? Welcome to zero fucks given conservation. We don't care if they die. Now would also be a good time to expose Linda's crimes. Listen, I know these two both love birds. I know they're not hurting them on purpose, but no matter how much the movie tries to tell you otherwise, Linda is not a good parrot owner by real-world standards. Strike one. Instead of tucking him into a covered cage before bed, she lets Blue free roam the entire apartment every night. This is a terrible idea for countless reasons. I would imagine that tucking in your bird is especially important when you live in a city because there's lots of extra noise and light pollution that could disrupt its circadian cycle. Ignoring this is how you wake up to screeching at 5 a.m. So Linda, do yourself a little favor and tuck him in, read him a bedtime story, or else you're gonna go downstairs one day and find him nibbling on what remains of your computer keyboard. Strike two. Linda allows him to be around active cooking equipment like toasters and even frying pans. But even if he does somehow escape becoming fried chicken, he is not immune to poison gas. Teflon is a non-stick coating sometimes found in cooking equipment. If this material gets too hot, it can emit toxic fumes that are very dangerous to parrots and could result in their sudden death. Not cool, Linda. Not cool. Strike three. The single most egregious thing she has ever done in her life. And that is feed Blue an entire plate of chocolate every morning. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chocolate chip cookies and a cup of hot cocoa. You've got some explaining to do! If you weren't aware, birds can't eat chocolate for the same reason cats and dogs can't eat chocolate. None of them can digest theobromine. So unless I suck at math, that entire entree would be 42 grams of chocolate. Although this amount wouldn't kill him instantly, it would in fact lead to vomiting, diarrhea, muscular tremors, high heart rate, restlessness and hyperactivity, and seizures and loss of consciousness. You might as well be feeding him thumbtacks, and honestly, I think that would be the more humane thing to do because it would kill him faster. It can also be gathered from a few throwaway lines that on top of the chocolate, Linda feeds him blue cheese with sprinkles on it. And guess what? Fermented cheese is bad for birds. It's honestly a miracle he hasn't turned into a black hole yet. And don't even get me started on the toothpaste, because that is not only extremely toxic to parrots, but why is he even using toothpaste? He doesn't have any teeth, Linda!
Is it hot? I think I'm sweating. I didn't even think that was biologically possible, and yet, look.
Oh. Wow.
Even though birds are basically reptiles, the movie still projects mammalian traits onto them. This is of course done for the sake of simplicity and audience relatability, but it still leads to some, well, technical complications. How does a bird spit onto the ground? Like, there's a beak in the way of that trajectory. Blue also says he pees in the bird bath, which obviously is inaccurate, because instead of having water-soluble urine, birds produce highly concentrated uric acid, which combines with their solid waste. So he shits the bath too? Plus, I'm not sure why the parrots only have 3 toes when in real life they're supposed to have 4. Probably just a style choice again. But since parrots use their feet to grab onto objects, that's functionally like missing a finger. This also results in a weird continuity error where Linda has a painting with 4-toed footprints on her fridge, which technically don't belong to Blue. So we just don't know whose feet these are. Anyways, I liked seeing Blue use his beak to open up latches or help him climb, and the feather rigging was also a really nice detail, especially when they prickled up around his neck. The effort from the animators really shines here, and they definitely did their research. They just so happen to be artists and not licensed scientists, which I don't think you can criticize them for. But do you know who I can criticize? Rafael the toucan. Why? Well, let's just say he's not the romantic lovebird we all once thought he was. At the 40-minute mark, we're introduced to Rafael through his rambunctious fledglings, who are caught trying to rip Blue and Jewel to shreds. He steps in and breaks up the antics, before casually saying,
"Kids, 17 of them, and one on the way."
17?! First of all, real Toko toucans have a clutch size of 2 to 4 eggs, so you've already lost me. Secondly, juvenile toucans look like this. They lack the same markings on their bill the adults have, and these proportions make them look even cuter than the film. But that's not what we're investigating. What we're investigating is the relationship between him and his wife. This is Rafael's wife, Eva. One of the first things you may notice, besides her overtly feminized build, is the fact that she does not look like him. In fact, what the film never states is that she is an entirely different species from her husband. She is a keel-billed toucan, and as far as I know, toucans don't hybridize. Even if they did, these two species in particular don't overlap in range, so they would never even meet in the wild. So explain this to me. How do they have so many kids? Regardless of their species incompatibility, a single pairing in the wild cannot produce this many offspring. But the more pressing question is, how do all 17 of them only resemble their father? There is only one explanation. Rafael was an unfaithful husband. According to our logic from earlier, he's gotten with at least 4 other female Toko toucans in this spring alone. No wonder he's scared to death of his wife. He's scared she's gonna find out. This is even more disgraceful when you realize that toucans are monogamous and they usually mate for life. I guess going to Carnival didn't always mean going to Carnival. Eva, I hope you grind this man into Fruit Loops. Or maybe you could consider polyamory. Actually, I don't know how any of this works.
Not my fault you got canceled. Canceled? Oh, nobody cancels Nigel.
Is anybody surprised that Nigel was my favorite character? No, because I'm predictable. Nigel is a dastardly cockatoo, and he's the main villain of this movie. He used to be a Brazilian TV superstar until one day his role was replaced. Now washed up and full of spite, his sole bitter intention in life is making every bird in Brazil as ugly as him, which we can only assume means disfiguring or killing them. But that's not all. Nigel goes about his evil misdeeds with style. He is such an extra villain, both when it comes to his cruelty and putting on a show. There's this one scene where he intimidates the monkeys to do his bidding. He drags one up in the air and then casually initiates conversation while the monkey is scrambling in the sky, pleading for his life.
Save me! Save me!
Oh, well, that's a thought, yeah.
I actually found a behind-the-scenes feature showcasing interviews with the lead animators, and as you can see, Blue's animator has some pretty reasonable items around his office. Seems to be a family man. And then you look at Nigel's animator, whose office is just full of Nigel. The sheer enthusiasm imbued into this character absolutely shows in the finished film. How delightful is that? Anyways, I got a little ahead of myself. Let's take a closer look at his species. Sulfur-crested cockatoos are pretty infamous for being troublemakers in the wild. In Australia, they've learned how to open garbage bins, they piss off other animals for fun, and just get up to general mischief. As pets, they also have a reputation of screaming a lot. But like all birds, they're just very social and need a lot of attention. So despite what Nigel says about being a bird murderer, cockatoos seem to be assholes at worst. But on that note, he is shown to eat a chicken drumstick and one of the smugglers calls him a cannibal. Rude. Although they do primarily eat seeds, many parrots are omnivores, and I did find footage of wild cockatoos eating some sort of unidentified meat object, so it's possible, but not cannibalism. Although he would most definitely endorse it. Next on the topic of birds eating other birds, you thought I was done with Rafael? Think again! Many species of toucans will actually raid nests and eat the eggs of other birds, as well as straight up hunting and eating parrots during the breeding season. So what I'm saying is, Rafael isn't only unfaithful, but he could have killed and eaten his friends if he felt like it. But we could all appreciate that he didn't. Now I understand why he's friends with Luis. They have a shared interest.
Watching them up there makes you want to chase them and grab them in your mouth and bite their heads off, huh?
Remember when I said the protagonists have mammalian traits? Well, Nigel is the only exception to this rule. Mostly. My theory is that they gave him all the quote-unquote creepy reptilian bird behavior and gave all the cute, warm-blooded traits to our protagonists. For one, he's the only bird that actually molts his feathers. In fact, he seems to have a problem with patches of his skin being exposed. I feel Blue in particular should also be doing this. Ever heard of stress molting? But the movie just loves being dramatic with Nigel's loose feathers, and for maximum peak, they had to confine that trait to him only. They also love to play cockatoo screeches as he's flying away, just to remind you that he's inhuman and threatening. Because if you have a rash, you're a monster. Oh, also, I have you here, you can't leave. You know those little serrated parts on Nigel's beak? Those are called tomial teeth, which are something hawks and falcons use to sever the spinal cords of their prey. Although they're smaller on parrots and cockatoos, etc., they do in fact still have them, so they've just been accentuated to make them look scarier. Fun fact, falcons are actually related to parrots more so than hawks and eagles. That's crazy! Birds are awesome! Oh my god, I forgot to mention this. So in one scene, Nigel suffocates the security guard and steals his keys and opens the door. I don't know about the suffocating part, but real cockatoos can in fact use keys to open doors. They are that smart. Pretty cool! Anyways, to wrap things up, we need to do the Nigel laugh together. But it'll only work if we do it together. Otherwise, it'll just be me, and that's embarrassing. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I said we were gonna do that together. Now, I know I didn't talk about Rio 2 a whole lot, because I unfortunately ran out of time, but they did have something really cool. When the gang arrives in the Amazon, we see Spix's macaws perched on the sides of clay banks eating their deposits. Clay eating is a well-known behavior of scarlet macaws and a ton of other parrots. They do this to help neutralize toxins from the plants they eat. They even say it's good for their digestion in the movie. But besides having background characters cameo as native species, That's about as educational as this movie got. As said earlier, Pedro is a red-crested cardinal, and he is native to Brazil. That's about all I had to say about him. Nico is a canary. I like their dynamic. They're cute. I thought they'd be annoying, but they actually weren't. They're also kind of fruity together. I liked that.
Oh my god, bro, stop making everything gay! This is a family movie! You're ruining my childhood!
I know this was a little more educational than my usual video style. My video style of 2 videos, but I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I personally had a lot of fun revisiting this movie, and I learned a ton more about birds while researching, which is always a great outcome. Anyways, I have to get 2 cavities filled and go on a 14-hour plane flight. So until next time, probably sometime in the summer or in November or in, I don't know when I'm uploading again. Just let me cook, okay?
Why are you doing that?